Manchester United have made it to a second consecutive FA Cup final, and although manager Erik ten Hag wants to claim that everything is fine and that they're doing well, they're not. Manchester United are fundamentally and tactically broken. Here's why. This sounds like a harsh thing to say, but I think it's true. Fundamentally, Manchester United are broken. They're broken in several other ways, but just really from a setup point of view and a style of play point of view, I just don't think it's right. And don't get mistaken, Manchester United do have a style of play. It's just not very good and it's not very apparent, and it doesn't really affect the game, I think, in the way that Erik ten Hag wants. What Manchester United want to do is get their attackers, in terms of their forwards, up the pitch as quickly as possible, getting into these danger zones to be able to utilise the possession higher up the pitch. They then use an aggressive style of pressing to be able to try and pen an opposition in. They have a number of problems with this though. If we move the Manchester United players forwards, I'll show you what I mean. So we have the three forwards going up, we have the two attacking midfielders going up, and then we have the central defensive midfielder in midfield. Now the problem immediately that Manchester United have is if they lose possession, for whatever reason, if they don't keep the ball, which Manchester United are not very good at keeping the ball, let's just be honest. Their passing isn't very good, their movement isn't very good, so they're more often than not going to be giving it to the opposition. When this happens and the ball gets turned over and it goes to the opposition centre-back, for example, the problem exists here. Because of the way that Manchester United want to go forwards, the centre defensive midfielder is left exposed. This is due to two things. It's the back four not pushing up high enough because they don't have enough mobility, and number two are the set of players who are going to go and press. Now when they press and they end up being out of position, they don't work back hard enough to come and help in this area. When this happens, the space that is isolated, or the space that is isolating the central defensive midfielder, is left extremely exposed. This leaves Manchester United essentially with opposition players running at their defence the entire time. And normally it leads to overcrowding of situations, it leads to overloads on a number of situations, and it means that Man United are exposed more often than not. A good example of that is here. So we currently are looking at the Fulham game that they had. They lost this game by 2-1, and we have the Fulham player currently on the ball. Now he's going to try and play a pass into midfield through the Manchester United midfield. So let's have a look at the midfielders. We have one, we have two, and then there's Bruno Fernandes being the third. Now the issue that they've got is the amount of players that are actually behind them. They can play the pass through into the Fulham players, and it's just so easy to try and find a way to bypass. And once you get bypassing this midfield, it's just so difficult to be able to stop any kind of attack. So the ball gets played through into Iwobi, who lays it off, and then you'll be amazed to see what happens next. So you've got 1, 2 and 3 Fulham players over here. You can't see the third one, but he's just over here on the left hand side. And then look at this. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's essentially nearly a 4-on-4. And you've got the Manchester United midfield here. They just don't have any kind of defensive stability or nous when it comes to stopping plays through the centre of the pitch. And this is through the willingness or wanting to go and press forwards. The cohesive unit as a team is not there, which allows them to be bypassed through so easily. Then you've got the second problem with their system, and that's the man marking system. Harry Maguire has realised that he's lost his man, so he goes up and presses. When Harry Maguire presses up, it not only allows for the Fulham player to take the ball in and then recycle, but it leaves him, and him exposed. And then you've got serious problems when they start running towards their goal, and that's exactly what happens. The ball gets laid off, and all of a sudden, what have you got? You've got 1, 2, 3 onto 1, 2, 3. It's a 3v3 from essentially a situation that was completely just not dangerous at all. It then continues forwards. The pace from Fulham allows them to expose Manchester United's slow defenders, and they get a shot off. Let's have a look at another instance now. We are seeing another perfect instance of the ball being played through into midfield. This is your last midfielder. This is Casemiro. And look at this. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 Fulham players onto 3. And this is your left back. The the actual setup of Man United's team and their man-marking basis just means that it's far too easy for teams to play through. It's schoolboy stuff. They're not defending space, they're not working hard enough to defend the space, and when they do work hard enough, their energy depletes in about the 70th minute. They are just broken. And then we can forward it on and see that Fulham at this current point in time have 1, 2, 3, 4 players on to 1, 2, 3. This happens time after time after time again with nearly every single team in the league. The overwhelming nature of the way that teams run forwards and the lack of a defensive unity with this Manchester United team exposes them on a regular basis. The other fundamental issue that Manchester United have is something that I mentioned just a minute ago, and that is the fact that they want to employ a man-marking system in midfield. Typically, you'd see the centre midfielder holding onto the striker, you'd have the 2 attacking mids holding the 2 attacking mids of the opposition, and then you'd have the striker trying to press up against the centre defensive midfielder or the 2 defenders. Now, the problem that this has is that with players willing to move and with the overloads that teams are able to create, it means that Man United are nearly completely overloaded on certain scenarios or certain sides on a minute-by-minute basis. Højlund is being asked far too much of to be able to cover the 2 centre-backs and the holding midfielder. The holding midfielder currently has a free role to be able to pick whatever pass he wants, which means that any kind of blindside runs from any of the strikers or the attacking midfielders are going to be extremely easy to find. With this, Man United have to do a lot of work, more work than I'd argue a number of other teams need to, because of the intensity that they need to play at. Now, in theory, what Manchester United want to do is to be able to turn over the ball because of their man-marking system in midfield and recycle it quickly. The ability to recycle it quickly utilises the forwards and almost allows them to get a half counter-attack, if you will, or at least a quicker attack than they would normally if they were to build up. But the problem they've got is the profile of players that they currently employ, in the fact that Casemiro is not exactly the fastest player and he's normally sat here, McTominay isn't great and he's normally sat here, or Mainu, he's not exactly the most physical of players, and then you've got Bruno Fernandes, who enjoys just wandering about wherever he wants to. Now, the problem with Bruno Fernandes wandering about and doing whatever he wants to is it leaves this man completely isolated. Now, obviously, it's a numbers game, so you can't have 2 Manchester United midfielders marking 3 opposition players. And time after time again, Bruno Fernandes does not realise that this is the case, because he's exuberant and he wants to go forwards. And depending on how you want to look at it, you could say that he's not doing his duty. But time after time again, the opposition player is always found. Now, naturally, when they go forwards, this creates an overload, because it forces the Manchester United defenders to really start to compensate, or the midfielders. And then chaos ensues. The running off the ball from opposition players is so good that it just leaves so much space and isolates so many different players that Man United's defence and their defensive midfielders have no hope at all of being able to stop any kind of attack. And it's through this that they just capitulate. This is showcased quite well in their game against Bournemouth. I want to highlight Kluivert, who's here. This is the build-up to his goal. Now, Alejandro Garnacho is currently sat here in midfield. You've got Casemiro and you've got Kobbie Mainoo right here. Rasmus Højlund is currently dropping a little bit deeper. But I want to really focus on Diogo Dalot, who, right here, is meant to be marking both Kluivert and the likes of Sinisterra. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for Dalot in this point, because not only is he needing to mark Kluivert because Campoala doesn't want to be moved out of his position, he's here, he also needs to make sure that Sinisterra doesn't get the ball. And because of the positioning of Garnacho, who isn't good enough in this man-marking system, it just means that Dalot has far too much to do. It means also that this pass right here is always on. And if you look at the space between the two, they're never going to get there. And lo and behold, what happens is that he's able to turn. Look at the space between them. I want you to also notice Dalot's actual body language. He's wondering what he's meant to do. He's holding his arms out, asking his teammates, guys, I'm alone. And what this happens and what this does is just cause so much chaos for the Manchester United defence that they can't deal with it. He gets a shot off and he manages to squeeze it into the bottom left-hand post for 2-1 to Bournemouth. But it's through the systematic just setup of the way that Man United want to play that is so wrong and it's so broken. It just means that they're essentially fighting a losing cause in every single game. Now, clearly a lot of this is down to the manager. It's his setup, his style of play, his tactics. But really, I do have quite a bit of sympathy for him. The players clearly are not suited to him. He's had a number of injuries to deal with, and he's clearly proven that he can get the team over the line, even if it is just a League Cup. Where I lack sympathy is the lack of adaptation. We know he's got injuries, but nothing's changed. The style of play hasn't altered. He hasn't reverted back to what he did last season. The midfield is still incurring problems. And either he doesn't see the issues, which I can't believe for a second, or he just doesn't want to accept them. And that might be worse. Manchester United are broken from the very core, and it requires a gutting of massive proportions and an influx of players of great quantity to be able to turn them around in a short period of time. I suppose the issue around all of this is whether Erik ten Hag is the man to do that.